Hey everyone, welcome on for Flavor Friday. And yes, I realize it is Monday. My Friday got hijacked. My son graduated from college and it was in the morning, and I just completely had a senior moment and didn't get it scheduled to go out at 11. So here we are on Monday doing last Friday's Flavor Friday. So thank you for hopping on and hanging in there. And I just want to dive right in. Let me know how your weekend went with your meal planning. What did you cook? How is the weather where you are? The weather always affects what we like to cook, right? If we want to cook outside or inside, do something long cooking, do something that doesn't heat up the kitchen at all, if it's fresh and bright or comforting flavors, right? So drop down below. What did you cook this past weekend? All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. Welcome on. My name is Rebecca Connolly. I am a personal chef and business mentor to personal chefs. And this is Flavor Friday. And every Friday, we talk about something that has to do with flavor, because flavor is how we savor both in the kitchen and at our table and in life, right? So this past week, we've been talking about picky eaters. And today, what I wanted to talk about is why picky eating isn't the problem and what actually is. So, all right. So, this week, we're talking about something that comes up all the time in conversations around food: picky eating. And I want to say something right off that might feel a little different than what you're used to eating. Picky eating isn't always the problem. Sometimes it's actually feedback. Let that sink in for a second. Picky eating isn't always the problem. And I just want to reframe the whole picky eating conversation altogether. Sometimes what we see as picky eating is actually feedback. All right. So a lot of us were raised with a very specific approach to meals, right? Raise your hand if this was your home. You get what you get. You know how that finishes off, right? Or eat what's in front of you. What else did you grow up hearing around the table? Drop that down below as well. I also grew up with finish what's on your plate, right? Always finish what's on your plate. Then you can have dessert. Made sense, right? Sweets follow the food that's nutrient dense. But I think we've learned since then, right? And to be fair, that does create structure. And when you're trying to feed a family, that helps you to create structure, it keeps things moving, keeps everyone fed mostly, but it also trains us to ignore something really important. And it teaches us to ignore our own preferences and our body's response to food. Intuitive eating, right? And this is something that I think has come up in the past decade or so, right? Intuitive eating. How is it that our body is responding to food? And is that something that we're just going to learn magically as an adult, to pay attention to how our body responds to the food that we're putting into it? No, it's something that we have to start teaching our kids when they're young. Yes, they need to try new foods. Yes, they need to be introduced to things. But at the same time, we need to pay attention to maybe that natural aversion, maybe that aversion they have. There might be something to that, right? So, okay, when I say start with flavor, here we're going to, and remember my framework is flavor first. We're pulling some pieces together here. So hang with me. So when I say start with flavor, I don't mean pick a cuisine or just cook what sounds good in the moment, which is what a lot of us end up doing at 5 o'clock in the evening. There's actually a whole science behind flavor. Flavor is taste, flavor is aroma, it's texture, it's how our brain processes all of it. I won't get too far into the nitty gritty, how many taste buds and that sort of thing, but our taste buds do renew every couple of weeks. So, but no two people experience food exactly the same way, because our taste buds really are unique. And there are super tasters, and then there are the opposite of super tasters. There are, and actually, taste is only 20% of flavor. 80% comes through our other senses. So, but in real life, we're not analyzing food like that, even though that's a fascinating conversation, and I've done a whole webinar on it. We're trying to answer something much more simple, right? What actually works in our own kitchens, at our own tables, on a daily basis, day in and day out, right? The one thing that, well, several things, but one of the top things we weren't warned about with adulting, right? You're going to have to not only feed yourself, but you're also going to have to feed your household 3 times a day, maybe more, forever. And it becomes fatiguing, just mentally fatiguing, right? So we want to know what actually works and what is actually going to work on a consistent basis. Raise your hand if that is your primary concern right now. What gets eaten, what people will come back to, and what feels good in the body over time. That's what I mean when I say flavor. So, for a long time, and if you've been with me this week, I've been sharing this story. I thought my son had become a picky eater despite all of my best efforts at introducing flavor from the womb all the way through nursing, all the way through introducing early foods. But at the same time, he had been a colicky baby and had always seemed to have sort of digestive difficulties. Nothing that sort of piqued the pediatricians, interest too much. They all seemed to think it was pretty normal what he experienced. So we didn't tend to think anything of it other than, well, okay, we'll just get more fiber into his diet, just get more lean protein, just get more hydration, right? But when I stopped trying to fix it, and I started just paying attention to the patterns of what he was naturally eating and what he was naturally avoiding, I noticed the patterns. And this was over years, by the way. This was not overnight. And even things, and as he began to be able to communicate more, right? A lot of times kids can't really communicate to us what their body might be feeling inside, what they might be experiencing. So we kind of have to guess, unfortunately. But I did notice that by the time he was 9, 10 years old, there are certain foods and meals that he would always eat. So pretty much any dish that I would make, any beef dish that I would make that also had Worcestershire sauce in it, that was always a yes. So things like meatloaf, sloppy joes, even meatballs, even though that doesn't, no, I did. Yep, that has some savoriness to it, right? Meatballs would work. What's another one? Salisbury steak, hamburgers, right? Pot roast. All of those dishes worked consistently. Now, we weren't having those 5 days a week, but I at least made one meal a week was one of those beef dishes that the entire family actually enjoyed. But I knew that he would in particular enjoy, and I would always make extra that way at another meal. If I knew it was something that may not pique his appetite, then I would have something to offer him, right? Because in the end, I was not going to fight at the dinner table. Long term, that is not a great strategy. All it creates is more disconnection, more anxiety, more not great things when it comes to food and a relationship with food, right? So then there were foods that he avoided just as consistently. He really wasn't eating. We loved sandwiches, and but anything, even something simple like turkey or ham on bread, he wouldn't touch deli meats. Anything with nuts. Now that's not terribly unusual for kids, but he wasn't, even like a PBJ, not his thing. Anything acidic or anything that was tart, anything that had cumin or paprika, anything that was not necessarily, definitely not spicy food, which was, we'd always introduce things fairly early. We love Mexican flavors. We love Indian flavors. We love Spanish flavors, Japanese flavors. So we tend to eat around the world every week, and that's what they were introduced to from a very young age. But even though he had been introduced to these foods, and it seemed to take to them by the time he was 8, 9, 10, even 12, and as he got into his preteens, we definitely noticed that, but we weren't making the connection between what was happening digestively and what he was intaking, right? My focus as a mom was, he's got to get his protein, got to get his fiber, he's got to get enough water, got to get enough calcium, right? So that's that's where I was at. How was I going to get him to eat these things? So, but those patterns, they weren't random. That was feedback. And if I had tried to force the issue, it would have been even more difficult, more challenging, and more painful, honestly, for him if I had forced the issue. And over time, that pointed to something real. He was finally, as a young adult, he was finally diagnosed with IBS, and he's learned how to manage that better with his food choices, as well as, and he does have some medication to troubleshoot as he needs it, but he can mostly manage his condition just by what he eats and what he doesn't eat. And all of that because we taught our kids to focus on food intuitively and on their appetites intuitively, and not just eat because it was there on the plate in front of you and I made it for you, right? Okay, so it looked like picky eating wasn't poor behavior, wasn't disobedience, wasn't bad behavior. It was information, it was feedback. Okay, so this is where everything changes. And that's also the moment, I think it was about that time, where I made the connection between, hey, this is how I cook for clients. Why don't I try the same method at home and see if it works? So that's where it shifted for me, taking what I knew how to cook for clients and cook to their taste preferences and for their dietary needs, right? And I was like, oh, wait a minute, I should be doing the same thing with my own kids, with my own family, with my own household. Because if it works for my clients and it had been working for 10 years, why wouldn't it work at home? But of course, that required me to take a big emotional step back, right? And look at things a little bit more objectively and not take things as personally, which can be hard when you're the mom trying to make it all happen, right? So, but what looked like picky eating, so it wasn't poor behavior, it was feedback, it was information. And I chose not to ignore the patterns in the name of control, in the name of I knew better for him what to eat. And yes, I do. I'm a certified nutritionist. I have years of experience with special diets. I know portions. I know, and just from my own journey with weight loss, I know portions. I know what the plate needs to look like, right? But instead of taking a controlling approach to what was happening at the table, I chose a better leadership model of teaching intuitive eating, right? So when we ignore patterns, when we ignore the feedback in the name of just being in control because we're the parent or the one in charge of the household, we're not creating better eaters. That's the thing, right? We're not creating better eaters. What we're creating is disconnection between not only the person and what's on their plate, but we're also creating disconnection at the table, which is the opposite of what we want to be creating, which is community. Disconnection from food, disconnection from preferences, right? Don't pay attention to your preferences. Your preferences don't matter. Disconnection from the experience of eating. So it doesn't matter if you're full or if it doesn't matter how full you are, you've got to finish what's on your plate. Well, that's not really helpful in the long run, is it? Right? So let's take this just one step further. Not being picky isn't actually the goal. As a personal chef, the hardest clients aren't actually the picky ones. It's the ones who say that they're not picky. Because if I don't know what actually works for you at your table, if I don't know what my client actually enjoys, then I can't build meals that will serve them. Right? That's not a cooking problem. That's a clarity problem. And this is particularly important when it comes to a client who is terminally ill or a client who has a very specific health condition. I've cooked for patients that have cancer and are terminally ill. One of my first experiences with cancer was a client who had gone into remission. She had stomach cancer, but this was her fourth time around dealing with it. And every cook date, I cooked for them every other week and made a number of meals individually portioned. But every cook date, I was making adjustments for taste, for flavor, for texture, because she was going through aggressive chemotherapy treatment, and her tastes and her appetites changed that quickly, right? So that was one of my first experiences. Another first experience I had with special diet was someone who was newly diagnosed with diverticulitis. And this is the sort of the opposite of this is the everything white diet is good. This is you want nothing with fiber. You don't want any fiber. You don't want any seeds. You don't want anything that's going to upset the gut. And that was very challenging. But, in the consult, we go through, all right, what's your wish list? If you have the flavors that you wanted to enjoy, what could you have? And that's my job as the personal chef, to make those flavors come to life and come to the foods that will actually nourish you. Another example of special diets where I was adopting flavors into different dishes that weren't necessarily native to that flavor profile. I had a family that had two separate allergy panels, very different allergy panels, and I cooked 3 meals for each one of those sets of dietary needs. And one of the sets of dietary needs, I think it was the mom and it was the father and the daughter. They loved Italian food, but they could not have tomatoes. Oh, what was I going to do? So I had to really look at different recipes, see what they had in common. I was like, all right, well, other than tomatoes, what are the key flavors? What are the key dry spices? What are the key aromatics? What are the key seasonings that Italian dishes tend to have in common? And that's what I'm going to use with the proteins and the veg and the carbs that they can actually have, and create dishes from there, right? So, clarity. All of this comes back down to being clear about what works and what doesn't work, what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And it's not about giving everyone what they want. And it's not about losing authority in the kitchen or at the table if you're the parent or the head of the household, right? It's about leading differently. So instead of controlling every decision, instead of taking that authoritarian stance that most of us may have grown up with, notice the patterns, build from what works, and create a structure that actually fits your real life and your real kitchen. Okay? So here's what this looks like. Here's what I want you to try for this next few days until we get to Friday for the next Flavor Friday, right? This week, instead of trying to plan everything, identify one pattern. It could be a protein that works for your whole household. It could be a flavor base that works for your whole household. It could be a type of meal that all of your people keep coming back for, right? Then build 2 or 3 meals from that. So you don't need 7 new ideas. You just need one direction. And that's where we're going to start. And if you want help applying this, if you're realizing, I don't actually know what works, that's exactly what we're working through inside our Kitchen Confidence Circle group, right? Learning to become aware of what works and what doesn't work. So comment group down below and I'll send you the link to our group. So remember, keep it simple. Pay attention to what works, what is working, and what hasn't worked. That's important feedback as well, right? And remember, flavor is how you savor both at the kitchen and in life. I will see you next time. Thanks so much for joining me.